There is a brown bottle sitting in your medicine cabinet right now. It cost you about $1.50 at the drugstore, maybe $2. You bought it to clean a scrape on your knee or disinfect a cut on your hand, and it has been sitting there ever since, quietly doing absolutely nothing. What I'm about to tell you is that the bottle you have been ignoring for years is one of the most powerful gardening tools in existence. And the fact that nobody at your local garden center has ever mentioned it to you is not an accident. The fungicide industry, the pesticide manufacturers, the big box garden retailers, they have absolutely no financial incentive to tell you that a product you can buy for pocket change outperforms chemicals they charge you 15, 20, sometimes $30 a bottle to sell you. I have been doing this for 25 years. I have watched people pour money into treatments that do not work, and I have watched their gardens fail. And I have known the whole time that the solution was simpler than anyone was willing to admit. Today, that changes. And before we go any further, I need you to drop your US state or your USDA hardiness zone in the comments right now, because what works in Florida is not always the same story as what works in Minnesota. And I want to give you advice that actually means something for where you are growing. Now stay with me through this entire video, because around the middle of this, I am going to walk you through exactly how to rescue a plant that has root rot, a plant most gardeners would throw in the trash, and bring it back from the dead with something that costs less than a cup of coffee. Do not leave before we get there. Let me start at the beginning, because I want you to understand what hydrogen peroxide actually is before we talk about what it does in your garden. When you buy that brown bottle at the drugstore marked 3% hydrogen peroxide, what you are holding is water with one extra oxygen atom attached. That is it. The chemical formula is H2O2, two hydrogen atoms, two oxygen atoms. Regular water is H2O. The difference is that one extra oxygen atom in that single atom changes everything. When hydrogen peroxide hits organic material, the cell wall of a fungus, the body of a pest larvae, the membrane of a harmful bacterium, it releases that oxygen atom in a burst. It oxidizes what it touches. It destroys the cellular integrity of pathogens on contact. And then, because this is the part that no chemical company wants you sitting with for too long, it breaks down completely into water and oxygen. Nothing left behind. No residue, no chemical buildup in your soil, no toxic runoff, just water and air. That is the foundation of everything I'm going to show you today. And I want you to hold on to that idea, because it is the reason this works so differently from what they sell you on the shelf. The first use is treating and preventing root rot. Let me tell you something about root rot, because I think most gardeners have been dealing with it for years without knowing that is what they were dealing with. If you have ever had a plant that looked healthy one week and then suddenly started drooping, yellowing, and dying from the bottom up, and you cannot figure out why, there is a very good chance that root rot was already working underground before you saw a single symptom above the soil line. Root rot is caused by anaerobic conditions in the soil. When your soil stays wet too long, whether it is from overwatering or from poor drainage or from compacted clay that holds moisture like a sponge, the oxygen gets pushed out. And when the oxygen leaves, the harmful anaerobic fungi move in. The most common culprits are Phytophthora, Pythium, and Fusarium. These are the organisms that attack the roots when the soil is waterlogged. They destroy the root's ability to take up water and nutrients, which is why a plant with severe root rot will actually wilt and look like it needs water, even when the soil around it is soaking wet. Now, here is where hydrogen peroxide changes the game entirely. When you drench the soil with a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution, two things happen simultaneously. First, that free radical oxygen atom destroys the anaerobic pathogens on contact. It is lethal to organisms that cannot tolerate oxygen. Second, and this is the part that genuinely excites me, it re-aerates the soil. It pushes oxygen back into the root zone, and oxygen is exactly what a struggling root system needs to begin recovering. This is not a slow, gradual fix. Gardeners who use this correctly will often see visible improvement in their plants within a few days, sometimes faster. I have personally saved container plants, raised bed tomatoes, and indoor tropicals that I would have otherwise lost using nothing more than a soil drench of diluted hydrogen peroxide. And if you compare that to the fungicide products at the garden center, the ones with labels so dense with warnings that you need to read them twice, there is no comparison in terms of what you are leaving behind in your soil. For a routine root health drench, you are going to mix 4 tablespoons of standard 3% hydrogen peroxide, the drugstore kind, the brown bottle, into 1 liter of water. That is it. That is your mixture. Apply it to the soil when the top layer of the potting mix has had a chance to dry out slightly, and then let the soil dry out completely before your next watering. I will walk you through the more detailed rescue technique for severe root rot later in this video, so stay with me. The second use is eliminating fungal and bacterial infections. Nobody told you this, and I want to be direct with you about it. When you see powdery mildew on your squash, when you see rust on your roses, when your tomato plants develop early blight or late blight, your instinct is probably to go to the garden center and pick up a spray. They will sell you something in a green or blue bottle that will cost you anywhere from $12 to $25, and it will work for about 3 days, and then you will be back. That is not a coincidence. That is a business model. Hydrogen peroxide, used correctly as a foliar spray, is a potent contact treatment for every fungal and bacterial disease I just named. Here is the mechanism. Those diseases are alive. Powdery mildew is a fungal organism. The rust you see on a leaf is a living pathogen. When the oxidizing action of hydrogen peroxide contacts those organisms, it ruptures their cell walls. It does not slow them down. It does not weaken them. It destroys them on contact. And because it breaks down into water and oxygen, it does not leave behind chemical residue that builds up in the leaf tissue or damages your plant's natural biology. Now, I will be honest with you because that is what this information is built on. Hydrogen peroxide is a contact treatment. It hits what it touches. It does not have systemic action, meaning it does not travel through the plant's vascular system the way some chemical fungicides claim to. So thorough coverage matters. You need to get the undersides of the leaves, the stems, the crowns of the plant. Fungal spores hide. They colonize the underside of foliage because they are sheltered from UV light there. If you spray only the tops of leaves, you are going to miss the problem. Use a pump sprayer, not a trigger bottle, and take your time coating every surface. For disease prevention, mix half a cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide into 1 gallon of water. That is your maintenance spray. For an active fungal infection that has already taken hold, you need a stronger solution. 8 to 12 tablespoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water. Spray the affected plant for 3 consecutive days. Then skip a day, then come back with a preventative spray. Baking soda solution, diluted neem oil, or a sulfur-based spray to keep the disease from returning. That rotating protocol is what actually stops an outbreak, not a single application of anything. The third use is repelling and killing garden pests. I want to talk about fungus gnats first because if you have ever grown anything in a container indoors or out, you have probably dealt with them. Those tiny black flies hovering around your soil seem harmless. They are not. The adult flies are annoying but mostly cosmetic. The larvae are the real problem. Fungus gnat larvae live in the top layer of moist soil, and they feed on organic matter and, critically, on plant roots. In a container with a young seedling or a recently transplanted specimen, a fungus gnat larval infestation can cause the same symptoms as root rot: wilting, yellowing, failure to thrive. People buy sticky traps. They help with adults. They do absolutely nothing about the larvae in the soil. A hydrogen peroxide soil drench wipes out fungus gnat larvae. The mechanism is simple and brutal. When that oxygen burst hits the larvae in the soil, it kills them. It disrupts their life cycle at the stage that matters. The adult flies will die off within a generation because they have nowhere to lay viable eggs. For this application, you mix 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide to 4 parts water. Let the top inch of soil dry out first. This is important because you want the larvae to be close to the surface and active. Then drench the soil thoroughly. You will likely see some fizzing at the surface, especially if there is organic material present. That fizzing is the oxidation reaction working. Apply this every 5 to 7 days for 2 to 3 weeks until you see no more adults emerging. For aphids and other soft-bodied sap-sucking insects above ground, A diluted foliar spray, the same half cup per gallon preventative mix I mentioned, creates conditions that aphids and spider mites find hostile. They are soft-bodied creatures. Hydrogen peroxide at even low concentrations is caustic to their exoskeletons upon direct contact. I am not going to tell you that a foliar spray of hydrogen peroxide is as immediately lethal to aphids as a direct hit of insecticidal soap. It is not. But as a preventative measure applied regularly, it creates a surface environment on the leaves that insects do not want to feed on. And it disrupts the conditions that make your garden an attractive target in the first place. I want to stop for just a moment because I need to be clear. No, your local garden center is not going to walk you through hydrogen peroxide treatment protocols. The person in the orange apron at the big box store is working from a retail script. They know the products on the shelf and they profit from you buying them. The gardening magazines run advertisements from the same companies selling you the chemicals. Let me be straight with you. If you have made it this far, you are not a casual gardener. You are someone who wants real information and who is tired of spending money every spring on products that were never really designed to solve your problem. This content exists for you. If you are not following along yet, I want you to take action right now. It is about giving you exactly what nobody else in this industry seems willing to say out loud. The fourth use is boosting soil oxygen and enhancing root growth. This is the one that takes people by surprise, and it is one of my favorites to explain because it connects to something that happens in nature that most gardeners have never thought about. Have you ever noticed how your plants seem to perk up dramatically after a heavy rainstorm? Not a gentle drizzle, a real downpour, and you probably attributed it to the water. But here is what I want you to consider. Rainwater, especially during a thunderstorm, contains dissolved oxygen and trace amounts of hydrogen peroxide. Lightning activity during storms creates ozone and peroxides in the atmosphere that get carried to the ground in the rain. Plants evolved in an environment where periodic peroxide-enhanced rain was a natural occurrence. The beneficial effect you see after a hard rain is partially about water, yes, but it is also about oxygenation. It is about the soil receiving a flush of oxygen that compacted, depleted growing medium cannot provide on its own. When you add hydrogen peroxide to your watering routine, even at very low concentrations, like the 4 tablespoon per liter maintenance drench, you are essentially replicating what a good rainstorm does naturally. The oxygen released in the soil stimulates root growth. Roots in an oxygen-rich environment are more active, more metabolically efficient, and better at pulling in nutrients. This is especially important for plants grown in containers, where soil compaction over time is almost inevitable, or in raised beds with heavy clay-based soil amendments that compact readily. If you have ever had a plant that seemed to plateau, growing but not thriving, not producing the way it should, compacted low-oxygen soil is one of the first things I would investigate. The fifth use is sanitizing seeds and speeding up germination. I want you to think about every seed you have ever planted that just sat in the soil and refused to sprout. You waited the 2 weeks on the packet. Nothing. You waited a third week. Still nothing. You dug around in the soil to see if something went wrong. The seed was still there, swollen, but not cracked, not growing. That failure can happen for a number of reasons: soil temperature, depth, moisture levels. But one of the most common and least discussed reasons is surface contamination on the seed itself. Seeds harvested and packaged commercially can carry surface bacteria and mold spores. In the warm, moist environment of a germination tray, those organisms can outcompete the embryo before the seedling ever gets a chance to establish. Soaking seeds in a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution before planting does 2 things that matter enormously. First, it sterilizes the seed surface. The oxidation reaction kills the bacteria and mold spores on the seed coat without harming the viable embryo inside. The embryo is protected, the pathogens are not. Second, and this is genuinely fascinating from a horticultural standpoint, the peroxide solution helps soften the seed coat. Seeds have a hard outer layer that protects them during dormancy. In nature, that coat breaks down through exposure to moisture, freeze-thaw cycles, or in some cases, passage through the digestive system of animals. A brief peroxide soak accelerates that softening process artificially, which means the embryo can access moisture more quickly, and germination speed improves meaningfully. I have seen germination rates on difficult seeds, old seeds. Seeds with notoriously tough coats improve by days and sometimes weeks with a pre-soak. For the soak, use 1 to 1 and 1 to 2 teaspoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water. Soak for no more than 30 minutes and plant immediately after. The sixth use is disinfecting tools, pots, and greenhouses. Let me tell you something that experienced gardeners know and beginner gardeners discover the hard way. Your tools are disease vectors. That pruning shear you used on a rose with black spot last Tuesday, if you did not sanitize it before moving to the next plant, you spread the pathogen. That pot you used last season that had a plant with root rot, if you rinsed it out with water and refilled it with fresh soil, you did not solve anything. The pathogen was still there on the inside of the pot, waiting for the right conditions to attack the next plant you put into it. Hydrogen peroxide is one of the most effective and least toxic sanitizers you can use on garden equipment. It kills bacteria, viruses, mold spores, and fungal pathogens on contact. For pruning shears and cutting tools, wipe the blade with undiluted 3% hydrogen peroxide between cuts when working with diseased plants. For pots and containers, fill or spray them with a solution of 1 part 3% peroxide to 1 part water. Let it sit for 10 minutes and then rinse. For greenhouse surfaces, benches, trays, walls, a stronger solution applied with a pump sprayer and wiped down will disinfect the environment before the growing season. Compare this to bleach, which is the other commonly recommended disinfectant. Bleach works, but it leaves behind chlorine residue that is not neutral to plant roots. It corrodes metal tools over time, and you cannot use it anywhere near your plants without risk of significant damage. Hydrogen peroxide leaves nothing behind. It breaks down. There is no residue to worry about. The seventh use is sterilizing growing mediums. Stop wasting your money on new bags of potting soil every single season if you are throwing away perfectly reusable growing medium out of fear of what might be in it. I want to be straight with you about something. The nursery industry benefits greatly from your not knowing. You can absolutely reuse potting soil, and hydrogen peroxide is the tool that makes it safe. Old potting soil, the soil from a container where a plant died, the soil from last year's tomato containers, or the bag of potting mix you bought from an unknown source can carry dormant fungal spores, insect eggs, harmful nematodes, and bacterial colonies that will attack whatever you plant into it. A single hydrogen peroxide drench of that soil before replanting will destroy those pathogens. Not reduce them, destroy them. The oxidation reaction is thorough. Mix 1 cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water and drench the growing medium thoroughly, making sure the solution reaches through the entire volume of soil. Then let it sit for 24 to 48 hours before planting into it. The peroxide will have broken down completely in that time, leaving behind nothing but water and extra oxygen in the soil, which, as I just finished explaining, is actually a benefit rather than a neutral state. This is particularly relevant for anyone who is starting seeds indoors, repotting container plants, or building out raised beds with soil brought in from uncertain sources. You are paying for protection. Give yourself that protection with something that costs less than $1. The eighth use is enhancing hydroponic and aquaponic systems. For those of you who have moved into hydroponic growing, and I am seeing more and more of that in this community, especially from gardeners with limited outdoor space or who want to grow year-round, hydrogen peroxide is not just useful, it is practically essential to maintaining a clean, healthy system. Here is the challenge with hydroponic setups. The water is warm, it is nutrient-dense, and it is recirculating. That is an absolutely ideal environment for algae growth, biofilm buildup, and the development of root rot pathogens, particularly Pythium, which thrives in warm, low-oxygen water. In soil, the solution is aeration. In water, the solution is direct oxygenation. Adding hydrogen peroxide to your hydroponic reservoir keeps the water oxygen saturated. The free oxygen released as the peroxide breaks down raises the dissolved oxygen levels in the water, which is exactly what root systems need to function in a hydroponic environment. Simultaneously, that oxidizing action prevents algae from colonizing the reservoir walls, tubing, and root chambers. Algae cannot establish in an environment with elevated oxygen and active oxidation. The typical addition rate for hydroponic systems is roughly 2 to 3 milli of 3% hydrogen peroxide per liter of reservoir water, added fresh every 3 to 5 days. Do not add it in massive doses less frequently. You want a consistent low-level maintenance rather than large periodic shocks to the system. And never add hydrogen peroxide to a reservoir that also contains a beneficial bacteria, inoculant like mycorrhizal products, or beneficial nematodes. Peroxide does not distinguish between harmful pathogens and beneficial organisms. It will destroy both. Plan your applications accordingly. The ninth use is preventing infection on damaged trees. Trees are the long game. I always tell gardeners who ask me about tree care that a mistake with a perennial can cost you a season. A mistake with a tree can cost you a decade or the tree itself. And damaged trees, trees that have been hit by storms, struck by lawnmower blades, or stressed by drought, are vulnerable to bacterial and fungal infection at exactly the point where they have been wounded. The tissue around a wound is exposed. The cambium layer, the living tissue just beneath the bark, can be invaded by opportunistic pathogens. Fire blight in apple and pear trees, canker diseases in stone fruits, crown gall in roses and fruit trees. These infections often begin at a wound site. Hydrogen peroxide applied to a tree wound carefully with a clean applicator or a spray bottle can reduce the pathogen load at that wound site meaningfully. You are not going to cure a systemic tree disease with a surface treatment of hydrogen peroxide, and I will not pretend otherwise. But as a first response to fresh wounds, a broken branch, a pruning cut made with an unsterilized saw, storm damage, a surface application of 3% hydrogen peroxide gives you a window of protection while the tree begins its natural wound sealing process. Spray or wipe the wound, let it dry, and monitor the site over the following weeks for signs of callus formation or, conversely, for signs that fungal colonization is occurring. If you see fungal fruiting bodies, mushroom-like growth, powdery spots, or discoloration spreading from the wound, address it immediately with a follow-up application and consider a professional arborist consultation if the infection is progressing. For trees showing wilting leaves, dead branches with no obvious mechanical cause, or spots and lesions on the bark, a hydrogen peroxide wash of the affected bark surface can reduce the external fungal and bacterial load and buy the tree time to respond. I want to pause the list for a moment and give you something practical about the complete hydrogen peroxide protocol, what you need to know before you begin. Because everything I have described above only works if you are working with the right concentrations. This is where people make mistakes. And in gardening, a mistake with concentration can mean burned roots, scorched leaves, and a dead plant. So, let me walk you through this clearly one time, and I want you to pay close attention. Do not use anything other than standard 3% hydrogen peroxide from the drugstore as your baseline. The bottle says 3% on the label. That is what you are working with. You can find it at any pharmacy, any grocery store for less than $2. There is also a product called 35% food-grade hydrogen peroxide, which some gardening enthusiasts swear by. I am not going to tell you it has no use, but I am going to tell you that at 35% concentration, hydrogen peroxide is corrosive. It will burn your skin on contact. It will scorch roots and leaves immediately if you use it without extreme dilution. If you insist on working with 35% food-grade peroxide, you must dilute 1 part of that concentrate with 11 parts of distilled water to arrive at a safe 3% equivalent before using any of the ratios I'm about to give you. That dilution step is not optional. Skip it and you will destroy what you are trying to save. Now, the dilution ratios for a foliar spray. To prevent disease before it starts, your maintenance spray, mix half a cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide into 1 gallon of water. That is a 1:32 ratio, and it is mild enough for regular preventative use on most established plants. For an active fungal infection that has already taken hold, you need to increase that concentration. Use 8 to 12 tablespoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water. You can also think of it as 1 part peroxide to 8 or 9 parts water. This is your treatment spray, not your maintenance spray. Do not use it every day indefinitely. For soil drenches targeting fungus, gnat larvae, or other soil-dwelling pests, mix 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide with 4 parts water. For a routine soil drench to promote root health and oxygenation, 4 tablespoons of 3% peroxide per liter of water is your number. For root rot treatment, the rescue application goes stronger. 1 part 3% peroxide to 2 to 3 parts water. Now I want to talk about foliar spraying technique because the dilution is only half the equation. You can have the right concentration and still burn your plants if you apply it wrong. First rule, always do a patch test before treating the whole plant. Spray 2 or 3 leaves. Wait 48 hours. Look for bleaching, spotting, or any sign of chemical burn. If those 2 leaves are fine, proceed with the full treatment. This is especially important with sensitive species, orchids, begonias, peace lilies, and any plant with very thin or delicate leaf tissue. Do not skip this step. Second rule, and this one people constantly ignore, do not spray in full sun or during the heat of the day. Hydrogen peroxide breaks down rapidly under UV light. If you spray at noon on a bright sunny day, the peroxide will degrade before it has time to work, and the concentrated droplets sitting on the leaves under magnifying sunlight can actually cause thermal burn on the leaf surface. Apply in early morning before the sun is fully up, or in the late afternoon once the day's peak heat has passed. Make sure the leaves are dry before you spray. A wet leaf will dilute your solution unpredictably. Third rule, coverage matters more than volume. Use a fine mist pump sprayer and coat every surface. Tops of leaves, undersides, stems, growing points. Take your time. Fungal spores colonize the undersides of leaves first because that is where they have protection from environmental stress. If you miss the undersides, you have missed the disease. For the sequence, when dealing with an active outbreak, spray for 3 consecutive days. Skip 1 day, then apply a different preventative treatment, baking soda solution, neem oil, or a sulfur-based spray to suppress regrowth. This rotation prevents the pathogen from adapting to any single treatment and interrupts the reproductive cycle of the fungus more effectively than any single product used alone. Now for the root rot rescue protocol, the one I promised you at the top. This is how you bring a plant back from the edge. Take the plant out of its pot. Gently shake or rinse off the excess soil from the root ball. Get a good look at the roots. Healthy roots are white or cream-colored and firm. Diseased roots are dark brown, black, or gray, and they will feel mushy between your fingers. They may smell. A sour, swampy, unpleasant odor is a sign of severe anaerobic activity. Using sterilized pruning shears, clean them with undiluted peroxide first. Cut away every root that is dark and mushy. Do not be timid about this. An infected root that you leave attached will continue spreading the pathogen to the remaining healthy tissue. Cut it clean. Once you have removed the diseased roots, prepare a bath of 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide to 2 to 3 parts water in a clean container. Submerge the remaining healthy root system in this bath for 5 to 10 minutes. You will see fizzing. That is the oxidation reaction working. That is the peroxide destroying the pathogens on the surface of the root tissue and oxygenating the cells. After the soak, gently pat the roots dry with a clean towel. Do not rub or pull and repot the plant into fresh, well-draining growing medium. Not the same soil, fresh soil. I cannot stress that enough. You just clean the roots. Putting them back into infected soil is a waste of everything you just did. When you water for the first time after repotting, add a small amount of diluted peroxide to the water, a mild drench at the 4 tablespoon per liter ratio, to disinfect the new soil and give the recovering roots an oxygen boost. Then exercise restraint. The #1 cause of root rot is overwatering. Let the soil dry out meaningfully between waterings going forward. Feel the weight of the container. If it is light, water. If it still feels heavy, wait. Give the plant time to stabilize before pushing it with fertilizer. A plant in recovery does not need nutrients pushed at it. It needs its roots to function first. Before I wrap this up, I want to take a moment to address something I hear from gardeners constantly. Is hydrogen peroxide safe around my vegetables? Can I use it on my tomatoes, my peppers, my herbs, my food plants? Yes. Let me be unambiguous. Hydrogen peroxide breaks down into water and oxygen. There is no toxic residue. There is no chemical that persists in the tissue of the plant or in the soil. You can apply it to food-producing plants and harvest from them without any concern about chemical contamination. This is in stark contrast to many synthetic fungicides and insecticides that carry pre-harvest intervals, designated waiting periods between the last application and when you can safely eat the crop. Hydrogen peroxide has no pre-harvest interval. It is gone before you could worry about it. That is not a marketing claim, that is chemistry. I also want to address the question of beneficial soil organisms, the good bacteria, the mycorrhizal fungi, the earthworms that make healthy garden soil thrive. When you drench your soil with hydrogen peroxide, you are introducing an oxidizing agent. It will affect some of the microbial life in the soil, including beneficial organisms. This is a real trade-off, and I want to be honest with you about it. The key is concentration and frequency. At the maintenance dilution of 4 tablespoons per liter, the impact on beneficial soil biology is minimal and temporary. At higher concentrations used for severe root rot treatment, you are making a deliberate choice to sacrifice some of the microbial community in exchange for saving the plant. After a heavy treatment, you can support the recovery of beneficial soil biology by adding a layer of compost, introducing a mycorrhizal inoculant, or using a compost tea drench in the weeks following treatment. Think of it as a medical intervention. Sometimes you need to accept a side effect to address the more serious problem. I want to give you a practical checklist before you finish. Start with root health. If your containers or raised beds have not been oxygenated in a long time, if your soil is compacted, if water pools on the surface rather than draining through, add a routine hydrogen peroxide drench at the maintenance concentration this week. You do not need a sick plant to benefit from this. Proactive oxygenation of the root zone is one of the highest value, lowest cost investments you can make in your garden's health. If you are starting seeds, pre-soak them. Give them 30 minutes in a diluted solution, a teaspoon and a half of 3% peroxide per cup of water, and plant immediately. It will clean the seed surface and give you a head start on germination. Track your results against unsoaked batches of the same variety and see for yourself how meaningful the difference is. Clean your tools every single time you move between plants when you are pruning during disease season. 1 pass of 3% peroxide on the blade. Let it sit for 30 seconds. Wipe dry. That is your entire protocol. It takes 15 seconds. It prevents you from becoming the person who infected your own garden by moving a pathogen from one plant to the next. If you grow in containers, drench the pots with hydrogen peroxide solution before you plant each new season. Let them dry, then plant into them with confidence. This is especially important if you had any root rot or pest issues in those containers last season. Keep a spray bottle of the preventative foliar mix, half a cup of 3% peroxide per gallon of water, labeled and ready through the growing season. Apply it to high-risk plants, particularly squash, roses, tomatoes, and any plant you have struggled with fungal disease in before, on a 2-week rotation as a preventative. You are vastly more likely to stay ahead of disease than catch up to it once it is established. And if you see the first signs of fungal infection, the white powder of powdery mildew, the orange pustules of rust, the yellowing and browning of early blight, do not wait. Move immediately to the treatment concentration and the 3-day spray protocol I described. Fungal disease does not pause while you debate whether to treat it. Act fast and you will save the plant. Wait a week hoping it gets better on its own, and you will be replacing it. Every week I aim to help gardeners grow real plants in real conditions with a real budget. No fluff, no sponsorships, no products I am paid to push at you. The advice I give you is the same advice I apply in my own garden. After 25 years of figuring out what actually works versus what the industry wants to sell you, hydrogen peroxide is $1.50. The treatments they sell you at the garden center to solve the problems hydrogen peroxide prevents and cures cost you $10, $15, $20, $30 a season, every season, forever. That math is not complicated. You just needed someone to say it out loud. I want to know where you are growing. Drop your state or your USDA hardiness zone in the comments right now. I read those comments and use that information to decide what we cover next. If you are tired of being sold to and want information you can actually use, stay tuned. If this guide on the hidden power of the brown bottle changed the way you look at your medicine cabinet and your garden, please subscribe and like this video. We are dedicated to uncovering the gardening truths that the big industries have tried to bury. Let's grow a healthier future together. The next treasure of gardening wisdom will be revealed very soon.